He took her to a cheap diner for their first date. What happened next shocked everyone. It was a chilly Friday evening when James nervously checked his reflection in the window of his small apartment. He had spent the last hour pacing, rehearsing what he would say. Tonight was his first date with Emma, the woman he'd been texting for months. They had met online, and their conversations had been effortless, funny, deep, and oddly comforting, but tonight, it was all real. He didn't have a fancy car or a fancy job, and certainly not the kind of money that could take someone to a trendy rooftop restaurant. But what he did have was a kind heart and a plan. He would take her to the tiny diner down the street, the one with neon lights buzzing softly and smells of pancakes and coffee that wrapped around you like a warm blanket. Emma arrived, wearing a cozy scarf and a hesitant smile. She looked around the diner, her eyes briefly scanning the chipped tables and old vinyl booths. For a moment, James felt a pang of doubt. Maybe this was too simple, too ordinary. "Hope you don't mind," he said, trying to sound casual. "It's not fancy, but the pie is amazing." Emma laughed softly. "It's perfect," she said, and sat down. They ordered coffee and shared a slice of cherry pie, laughing at each other's clumsy jokes and swapping small stories. The conversation flowed easily, as if the diner's simplicity allowed their words to matter more than appearances. Then James noticed something unusual. Across the diner, an elderly man sat alone, shivering in his coat, his hands trembling over a nearly empty cup of coffee. His plate had only a few crumbs left. James felt a tug in his chest. He leaned closer to Emma and whispered, "Do you mind if I—" She nodded, her eyes softening. James walked over and asked the man if he would like another coffee and a slice of pie on him. The man's eyes welled up with tears. "Thank you. I haven't had anyone ask that in a long time," he said quietly. Emma watched from the booth, her hand finding James's. She squeezed it gently, silently telling him how much she admired the gesture. As the evening went on, they continued their date, but something had changed. The diner felt warmer, not because of the neon lights or the cheap coffee, but because of the humanity they had just shared. Laughter mixed with the quiet gratitude of a stranger. Before leaving, the elderly man called out, "Young man, don't ever forget the power of kindness. You made my night." James and Emma walked out into the cold night, hearts full. On the walk home, Emma looked at him, eyes shining. "You know, I wasn't expecting anything fancy tonight," she said. "But this shows who you really are, and that's what matters," James smiled. He realized then that the true magic of a first date wasn't in the money spent or the place chosen. It was in the moments where hearts connected, when small acts of kindness could ripple far beyond your own little world. That night, as they said goodnight under the streetlight, they both felt something rare, hope, warmth, and a quiet certainty that sometimes the simplest gestures are the ones that leave the deepest impact. And for anyone who witnessed it in that little diner, it was a reminder that humanity, compassion, and selflessness can appear anywhere, even over a slice of cherry pie at a cheap diner, and shock the world in the most beautiful way. The next morning, James woke up to a message from Emma. "I can't stop thinking about last night. You made me see how simple moments can mean everything," he smiled, his chest warm. He replied, "I'm glad. I think kindness is contagious. Maybe we should spread some more." A few days later, they decided to visit the diner again. Not for themselves this time, but to check on the elderly man. When they arrived, they found him in the same corner booth, but this time with a small notebook and a smile. "I've started writing again," he said proudly, showing them pages filled with short stories and poems. "Your kindness reminded me that I still have something to give." James and Emma sat with him for hours, listening and sharing stories. The diner buzzed with its usual quiet charm, but for them, it had become a place of connection, inspiration, and unexpected friendship. Word of their small act of kindness began to spread. Soon, the diner became a little hub where strangers shared smiles, warm drinks, and stories. People who might have been invisible in the busy city found themselves noticed, cared for, and, more importantly, connected. Through it all, James and Emma's bond deepened. Their first date, so simple, so ordinary, had sparked something extraordinary. Not because of romance alone, but because they had experienced together the joy of giving, the quiet thrill of impacting someone's life without expecting anything in return. Months later, they returned to that same diner, now a little brighter, a little busier but just as cozy. Sitting in the corner booth sipping coffee, James reached across the table and took Emma's hand. "Do you remember what you said that night?" he asked. "That the simplest gestures matter most?" She replied, smiling. "Exactly. And every day since, I've wanted to keep living that truth," he said. "With you, with kindness, with people like him, I've realized life isn't about the fancy moments. It's about the heart behind them." Emma leaned closer. "Then let's keep doing it together. One small act at a time," and so they did. From helping strangers with a cup of coffee, to volunteering at shelters, to simply offering a smile to someone in need, they learned that small, intentional acts of kindness can ripple outward in ways you never imagine. The diner, once just a quiet little place with buzzing neon lights, became a symbol of humanity, connection, and the beauty of noticing others. And every time James and Emma walked through its doors, they were reminded that a simple first date, shared over cheap coffee and cherry pie, had changed not just their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. In the end, they discovered a truth that anyone, anywhere, could embrace. Kindness is never wasted. Even the smallest gestures can shock the world in the best possible way. The weeks passed, but neither James nor Emma forgot the elderly man, Mr. Thompson. They started making small visits to the diner together, bringing along extra coffee and pastries. Each time they sat with him, listened to his stories, and helped him with little errands. Slowly, the man's world grew brighter, and so did theirs. One rainy Saturday, they noticed Mr. Thompson struggling to carry a bag of groceries. James rushed to help, and Emma held an umbrella over all three of them. The elderly man looked at them with tears in his eyes. "You two, you remind me that life isn't just about surviving. It's about living and caring." That moment sparked an idea in James and Emma. They began volunteering on weekends, delivering food to the elderly, reading to children in shelters, and helping neighbors with small tasks. Their acts of kindness started small, but like ripples on water, they reached far beyond what they could see. Meanwhile, their own relationship deepened. Sharing these experiences created a bond stronger than any fancy date ever could. Emma loved how James always noticed the little things, how he valued people over appearances. James admired Emma's empathy and willingness to step into someone else's shoes. One evening, as they returned from volunteering, they passed the diner again. James stopped and turned to Emma. "You know, this diner, it started as just a first date, but look at what it's become. A place of connection, of humanity, of kindness. And it all began with a simple choice." Emma smiled, squeezing his hand. "I think that's the real magic. Not the diner, not the pie, but what we choose to do for others. That's what changes the world, one small act at a time." Months later, the diner had become a quiet hub of community warmth. Mr. Thompson now sat at a regular table with other patrons, sharing his stories, smiling and laughing. New friendships had formed among strangers, all because two people chose to care. James and Emma realized something profound. A life lived with kindness isn't just about doing good. It's about inspiring others to do the same. And in the process, it creates joy, connection, and love that no fancy dinner or expensive gift could ever match. As they walked home that night, hand in hand, the city lights reflecting in puddles on the street, they both knew that their journey had just begun. A single first date at a cheap diner had sparked a chain of compassion that would continue to grow, changing lives, spreading hope, and proving that humanity's simplest gestures are often its most powerful. And in that quiet realization, they felt a shared promise to keep noticing, keep giving, and keep creating ripples of kindness wherever life took them. Weeks turned into months, and the memory of that first diner date never faded. James and Emma found themselves drawn not only to each other, but also to the small acts of kindness that had started it all. They began seeking opportunities to help in their neighborhood, delivering groceries for elderly neighbors, volunteering at local shelters, and even organizing small community meetups at the diner. One afternoon, Mr. Thompson called them with a shaky but excited voice. "I've been working on something," he said. When James and Emma arrived at his apartment, he showed them a neatly written collection of stories and poems he had been composing since their first act of kindness. "I thought I'd forgotten how to dream," he admitted, tears glistening in his eyes. "But you reminded me that life still has beauty." James and Emma realized that the impact of a single act could extend far beyond what they imagined. It wasn't just about helping one person, it was about inspiring hope and rekindling dreams. Emma smiled at James, realizing that their